Hey guys, we are kicking off, I guess, the ongoing series of me opening my older 90s and very early 2000s era Star Wars figures because I did have quite a bit of response for people asking me to do this. So I'm going to kind of go through everything. It's going to be just, as I get time to do them, and we're going to do them randomly. There's going to be no real, theme or rhyme or reason to which figures I'm going to open. I'm going to grab some and we're going to take a look at them. So today we're going to take a look at 3 single carded figures and then a 3-pack, and they all kind of come from varying eras of these toys. So I kind of consider the Power of the Force 2 stuff, Power of the Jedi, and the Phantom Menace stuff all kind of to be one big line because they're all very, very similar. So I'm going to kind of group them all together. So we're going to take a look at 3 bad guys. We're going to take a look at the 3-pack. So I've got, the bad guy for episode 1, we have got the Darth Maul figure. We've got from the subline to the Power of the Force 2 figures, we have got Prince Xizor from Shadows of the Empire. And then we have got, of course, this is a bad guy. We've got Darth Vader from the original beginning of the Power of the Force 2 line. And I'll kind of go through packaging before I open these guys up just so you can see what is different and how to know kind of which ones come from where and when in the line. Obviously there's some visual differences about them. And then the 3-pack we're going to take a look at is the this is a Power of the Force 3-pack of the Force Ghosts from the Endor scene in Return of the Jedi. This is a later in the line entry. So let's go through packaging just real quick. I'm going to do some up close shots on this stuff, and then we'll pull them out and take a look at the figures. Now, as far as packaging goes on these figures, for the most part, the carded figures are all very, very similar. They are very thematically similar in that regard, but obviously there are some visual differences, and then these things come from different eras of the line. So the Power of the Force 2 line started in '95 and it ran until 2000. The Phantom Menace kind of took over, and then the Power of the Jedi stuff started a little bit after that. So one of the main ways to know is when a figure came out is by the color of the card. So the red lightsaber cards are the original wave. These are the first figures that came out. They also have a copyright date of '95 on the back, and they also say that they are part of the Tonka Corporation just because of how the ownership of Kenner, Tonka, Hasbro, everything was all kind of mixed together at that time. These have a Tonka copyright on them, and then of course the big thing is the orange-red coloration for the lightsaber. The Shadows of the Empire figures obviously have their own unique coloring. They all have these purple color cards. They of course say Shadows of the Empire on them, but these came out in '96, so they are a little bit later. They are just a subline. There aren't very many figures in this line. I've opened most of these other ones in a previous video a while back. But they are basically the same except for the coloration and the fact that they have a different date stamp. They also don't say anything about Tonka on them anymore. So that's how you can tell the Shadows of the Empire apart, but they're very, very easy anyway. The Phantom Menace stuff is obviously going to have that Phantom Menace styling on it. Vader is removed from the packaging, and we have got Darth Maul, but they are still very, very similar in their look and feel. These are very similar cards. The design elements are taken mostly from Power of the Force 2. These guys have the Comtech chips in there, and then the backs now have no indication of Kenner anymore. This is after Hasbro has kind of done away with the brand name. We've gone to Hasbro on the packaging, and then of course everything shows just episode 1 stuff. You can say I've still got my original Walmart price tag on this guy. He was $6.74 back in '99. And then the 3-pack, this guy came out towards the end of the Power of the Force 2 line, 98, 99-ish. So that's when episode 1 was ramping up. And of course, 98 is when they stopped using the Kenner line, I believe, and they put Hasbro on all the packaging. These also have moved to green colors at one point in the line, and we'll see figures like that down the road as we go through them, where we have changes from the orange-red card backs to green card backs. And figures got re-released. They have multiple card backs, but the go-forward color was green, which you see here. And then, of course, there is a ton of call-outs to episode 1 because at this point, that's what they're pushing. So let's take these guys out and just play around with them and see what they have to offer. Alright guys, so here is the 3-pack out of the box. We're going to look at these guys first, and then we'll take a look at our villains. So we've got Anakin Skywalker, we've got Yoda, and we've got Obi-Wan Kenobi here. And obviously there is something else in this package as well, because they came on this huge base, which is about 10 inches long, and it is basically to mimic the platform they're standing on in that final scene on Endor in Return of the Jedi after the destruction of the second Death Star. So we've got these 3 Force Ghosts that are basically non-moving toys. They do have moving arms, but mine really don't want to move. Honestly, I'm not sure if they're supposed to move. And they come screwed onto this base. And it even has a note to say that parents should remove and dispose of the screws. So, you know, you unscrew them and then you can take them off of this base. I'm not going to do that. I think honestly, it makes it easier for me to store these guys to just leave them on this thing. And I like the idea that they're not coming off. So we've got 3 figures here. They're cast in a slightly green translucent plastic with a white overspray on them to give them a ghostly look. I'm not sure if it's as green as it should be. I think it's a little light for my taste. Obi-Wan is probably the best example of this. Anakin here is a little too oversprayed, I think. And this is obviously not Hayden Christensen Anakin Skywalker. This is Sebastian Shaw Anakin Skywalker, the original, the true old Force Ghost Anakin Skywalker. And in general, I think these actually look pretty solid. Like, for a nice little display piece, this works pretty well. But again, they don't really do a whole lot. Even if you wanted to move their arms, you're not going to move their legs because every other thing on them is basically static. The heads do move. Plastic on these guys is a little gummy these days. I'm seeing that more and more with these figures as I open them. But for the most part, I think they look pretty nice. Yoda is definitely my favorite of the 3. I think that head sculpt on him is pretty nice. Very much looks like the Yoda that I remember from the movies. And in general, I think this is a pretty neat set. I mean, I picked this guy up for 10 bucks, I think. And it wasn't exactly expensive in the 90s either. But for 10 bucks these days, I got a lot of plastic here. And in general, it's a translucent toy. I'm not going to complain too much anyway. And here are our 3 villains off their card backs. We've got Shizor, we've got Maul, and we have got Vader. So we're going to talk about Vader first. And if you haven't already noticed, there is something slightly extra going on with this particular figure. Does he look a little beefy to you, like Vader's been hitting the gym, maybe roiding out just a little too much? That was kind of a theme with this line in the mid-90s, was to kind of combat the rise and surge in popularity of comic books and superheroes. They made these figures so beefy. Vader's got some huge guns, he's got a big barrel chest. He definitely looks like he's been hitting the gym far more than you might have ever expected, and certainly since the last time he was seen in toy form. For me as a kid, I'm not sure I ever really noticed, but it's really hard to not see it now. I don't really care, makes no difference to me at this point, but it's definitely an interesting design choice, especially considering what Vader should look like. So, that said, for this figure in general, it's a pretty decent figure. He comes with his red lightsaber. How could he not? He does have a removable cape for one reason or another. You know, give the kids an extra accessory, I guess. And he has 6 points of articulation. We've got a moving head, moving arms and legs, and he has a waist swivel as well. So you can do some things with him, but he's not the most dynamic. That wasn't the point of this line. That's kind of the way it goes. But for the most part, this is, you know, as I've said in other videos, this is the toy line of my childhood as far as Star Wars goes. You know, I was 10, 11 years old when these were hitting store shelves. So they were the Star Wars figures I had as a kid. I came after the vintage line. The original vintage line was long gone by the time I was able to play with Star Wars figures. So once these were out and these were kind of becoming a surge in popularity again for Star Wars toys, these are the figures that I had. And this figure holds a special place for me just from a nostalgia purpose, that this is the Vader I think of when I think of playing with Star Wars figures as a kid. Now for Prince Shizor here, this is a character that you may or may not be familiar with unless you're familiar with the Shadows of the Empire. So Shadows of the Empire was a story that took place around the Empire Strikes Back timeline, came after the fact, obviously, not during the original movie releases, but it's a book that turned into a video game that ultimately had a toy line as well. So there was an N64 video game that might be familiar to a lot of folks. The book is also a really great read as well. It was one of my favorites at the time. I really enjoyed that book, and that's where he comes from. He is the leader of the Black Sun. He is a Faline, that's his race, and he is just a big gangster, really. He comes with his 2 energy blade shields, and these guys are kind of goofy. They're very unwieldy. You know, they're not the most interesting looking weapons. He can hold them both in each hand. And what you can do with them is you can take them apart, well, take them out of his hand anyway, and then they go together like this. But once you do that, he really can't do a whole lot with them. There's no place to put them, and he can't really hold them when they're like this. So there you go. But as far as the figure itself goes, it's a pretty basic figure, just like Vader was. He's got a swiveling head, he's got rotating arms, rotating legs, and he has a waist swivel as well, which you can get to underneath this big robe, but at the end of the day, it's also not going to do a whole lot for you either. As far as his design goes, he does have a little more going on for him than Vader does. He's got this flowing robe, which is attached to the body. You can't really pull it off too well. You could if you tried, but why would you want to? And you can see his spine going through the back. So it's an interesting design choice just for the alien species in general. I always thought he kind of looked more Star Trek than Star Wars, at least as far as this figure goes. And then he's got kind of like a chainmail design almost on the robes that run down. But I've always been a big fan of this character in particular, and I always loved this figure. I've never opened this figure until now, so I've never actually had this guy out of the package. When I was buying these as a kid, I only opened a handful of the Shadows of the Empire figures, Luke being one of them, and I always kept my Xizor sealed. And lastly, we've got the final character to be released as far as these figures go. We got Darth Maul. So this guy, he was the easy choice for doing these three villains just because he's the bad guy for episode 1. He's the one you want to see. He's also got a little bit more going on in terms of his figure than the other guys. So we've got a swivel at the bicep and a swivel at the wrist. So it allows him to hold his lightsaber with both hands. He also has a rotating head. He can swivel his arms up and down. He has kicks on the legs, but you're not going to move him too much because of the robe. And then he does have a waist twist. This guy, just like the Force Ghost, is really, really gummy. His robes at the bottom of the legs, they are very, very gummy, very sticky. Very much makes me not want to touch this figure too much. But he looks pretty decent. I think the head sculpt on him is rather rough in terms of its likeness to Ray Park. But we're talking 1999 here, so I'm not too upset about that. I've got some paint issues on the horns on my figure, but the rest of the paint apps on the face are actually pretty solid, especially for the time. He, of course, comes with his double-bladed red lightsaber. It does not split apart, but since he can hold it in both hands, I will give that a pass. And the one thing that kind of separates this figure from the others, at least in terms of what it offers on the card, is that one of the things for the Phantom Menace line was that they had these Comtech readers. So you could use a little device and it would make it talk. I don't have one handy right now. I don't even know where it is. They also double as a stand, so you can put them on their Comtech readers as a stand, and you can have them, you know, just standing there, or you can use the device and have them talk. But that was a big thing. It kind of sounds like what we're going through these days with the Force Link technology when you think about it. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for this look at these 6 action figures, and these aren't really going to be reviews, just like this video was mostly just me open them, look at them, talk about them real quick. I'm not going to review these figures. There's no real point at this point in the game. So we've got 6 done. There's a lot more to go. If there's any figures in particular that you think you might want to see me do, let me know. I have pretty much everything, and I'm going to try to track down some more as well. But that's going to do it for this first look at the Power of the Force style line of figures from Kenner and Hasbro. Let me know what you think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share that whole deal. Thanks for watching, and until next time.